Well, good morning or good afternoon, as it might be, and welcome to another Webinar Wednesday. Good afternoon, I'm Kelly Bearden. I'm the director of the CSU Bakersfield Small Business Development Center, and I'll be your host today as we move Managing Your Small Business Beyond the Pandemic, number 73. 73. So as we move into beyond this pandemic, hopefully it stays away. We'll go through a lot of things today that are going to be impacting small businesses and as we move forward. So got a lot to do today, got a great guest. Let's get rolling. As you can see, probably from my background, I'm on the road again. And I say again, I'm on the road and we are at a Central Coast location where we are doing some SBDC strategic planning, and we have some accreditation going on. So it's been a while since I've done one of these in a hotel room, but here we are. So here we are at noon in a hotel room doing a webinar. So that's our backdrop for today. So look at that. That's going to be our poll question that's coming up. And let's jump in and let's do the poll right now. We look positioned to be able to do a poll, and we're going to just a little bit of backdrop on today's poll is what we're going to do is we're going to look into some of the questions that we've asked before from the National Federation of Independent Business. Many of you that have been along for this ride have known that we like using surveyed information from the NFIB. Not a plug for them, but they kind of fit the same demographic as the SBDC on a national level. A lot of their businesses are 20 employees across the country. And so we get a good sample, and we've been really hitting a lot of really close numbers on what we're seeing national and what we're seeing locally with some of the key questions that they've been asking. And these are a couple of questions. We have 3 questions today, and they've been ones that we've asked throughout the pandemic on about every 3-4 month basis. So we've done it 3 or 4 or 5 times by now, and it's going to compare your performance pre, post pandemic and others. So let's launch our first poll, and it's going to be on your current gross sales revenue. And it's going to be how it compares to pre-pandemic levels. So is it more than 100%? Is it between 75 and 100%? 50 to 75, between 25 and 50%, or less than 25? So your current sales revenue, and this is a poll that was taken by the NFIB on June 30th, so pretty fresh information as we come out and move beyond this pandemic. So again, your current sales levels, how does it compare before the pandemic? Is it more than 100%, between 75 and 100, 50 to 75, 25 to 50, or less than 25%? Okay, we have about 43% of you that have voted. Anybody else wants in, going to give you one more moment or two. I'd like to get that percentage over 50% of you that have participated. And again, it's current sales compared to pre-pandemic. That could be the month of, say, July compared to the month of July before or whatever. Okay, well, we do have 48% of you in. We're going to end the poll and kind of share the results with you and compare them nationally. So first of all, we'll share the results, and see is most of you are falling into that 50 to 75%. That would be 43% of you. 38% of you are at 75 to 100%. So it's good to see, essentially 3/8 of today's audience is actually at 3/4 to full amount of sales before the pandemic. Between 25 and 50 is 10%. And then lastly, tied for last, is 5% of you less than 25% and 5% more than 100%. So 43, 38 were the big ones. So let's jump ahead right now and kind of see where that went. Oh, look at that. It's a little higher on the between 75 and 25 and greater than 100% than we're seeing. So a little more on the end national, what we are actually witnessing, but we will actually move on to our second poll. And our second poll is, how long do you think before your local community will get to pre-crisis economic activity? Perfectly good question to ask when we have an economist here. Is it now, the second half of 2021, the first half of 2020, second half of 2022, or the year 2023 and beyond? So when do you think your local community will get to the pre-crisis economic activity? And we had a roaring economy going in January and February, early March of 2020. The economy was really, really clipping. So how long do you think it'll be before we can get back to that pre-crisis economic activity in your community? So jump in and vote. And we have 54% that are in now. We're going to give you another moment or two and jump in. 61%, that's a good sample size. I like that. So we are going to close the poll. Last moment, get in. And it's closed with 65% of you voting. Many of you think it's going to be the second half of 2022, 39%. And 25% have it being the first half of 2022. And these numbers are markedly more pessimistic than when we ran this poll a couple of months ago. And it must have something to do with that Delta airline, Delta variant, Delta something. So also we have 25% of you think it could be 2020 or beyond. So 7% think we're getting there now. And the rest of this year, only 4%. So a little more pessimism this time than what we'd seen kind of with the vaccine coming out a few months ago. Okay, we're going to stop sharing that particular poll and now move on to our last poll, number 3. And just launch the poll and just ask, how long will it be before you're able to operate your business under current economic conditions? So how long can you run your business still the way things are going? Is it less than 2 months? Okay, do you have resources to run it for 3 to 6 months or 7 to 12 months or 12 months and beyond? And so jump in and vote. You have current funding, current resources to operate your business for less than 2 months, 3 to 6 months, 7 to 12 months. Jump in and vote. We got 57% of you in now, and numbers continuing to go up. So I'm going to close this poll and end it and share the results with you. So well over 60% of you in. We're looking at, most of you have over 12 months of resources available, 48%. But alarmingly, only 22% of you have less than 2 months of operating capital. And that is also a little worse off than what we'd seen in the past in this poll. 19% of you have 7 to 12 months, and 3 to 6 months, 11%. So the key number there is 48% as we stop sharing and move it forward just a little bit. And move that now and stop that poll. And let's kind of look and see what the national trend on that one is. Look at 73% over 12 months, with only 2% having 2 months or less. So locally, at least with our attendees today, it's a much more dire situation than it has been in the past with this poll. And maybe the 5-week gap from when this poll was taken to now is really kind of reflective in what is happening in many of the locales with some of the things that are going on with more restrictions for small businesses. Okay, well, thank you for that, and thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. Your input is always so valued here as we kind of move through. And again, those were the results. And just to go back on, here is what the question number 2, we didn't share nationally what the poll question was from the NFIB. And that was 20%. The majority thought it was going to be the second half of this year or the first half of next year. 17% 2022 and 13%. So what we're really seeing is some really big number shifts from our poll now compared to what we've had before with the National Federation of Independent Surveys on a national level. And their sample sizes are larger than ours, but still, we've been really hitting really close on a lot of this information, and now we're kind of gapping. And I'm wondering, this is really intriguing me because I'm really wondering if this minor 5-week period of time with the virus coming back in some locations and coming back fairly strong is weighing on people in more ways than one. Okay, so what else are we going to be talking about today? What's up today, August the 4th? Well, today SBA is opening the SBA forgiveness portal, and that is open to the best of my knowledge. It opened today for those that are $150,000 PPP first draw or second draw or less. And we're also going to talk a little bit more about, because, you know, with the PPP portal forgiveness, it's up to your bank to opt in. If your bank doesn't opt in, you're still going through your lender. But the other thing that SBA generated was this scoring tool for evaluating the 25% reduction that was essential for second draw. So if you received a PPP second draw, you had to at least certify. You didn't have to provide the documentation early, but you did need to certify that you had a 25% reduction in any quarter from 2020 to 2019. And it could have been any one of the 4 quarters. So SBA had said, well, gee, when you go through forgiveness, you're going to need to provide that information. And SBA is wanting to move on. They're wanting our banks to move on, and they're wanting our small businesses to move on. And so they created a tool that we'll get into, and we'll look at this tool to effectively, if you pass the 25% threshold by using their tool, you will not have to provide that information. And that'll be available for everyone, even if your bank does not use the SBA PPP forgiveness portal. Okay, EIDL changes. EIDL keeps moving on, and you know, the backup that we've been talking about for several weeks, maybe months, is I'm getting some really encouraging news from you out there, clients. And I really want to thank you, attendees of this webinar, and our SBDC clients that provide an email or just notify and let me know what's going on, because you are really, between you and our consultants out in the field, you're the best tools I have to know what's going on. And so when you let me know what's going on, and I know not everybody has had satisfaction with some of the reconsiderations through the EIDL program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, the SBA Disaster Program, but many of you have, and I really appreciate you providing that information. Our shuttered venue grant is still open. We won't talk about it, but there is no backup there. And if you have a shuttered venue, or you know a shuttered venue, and you thought it was too complicated and too complex, because we did tell you for numerous weeks that it was SBA's most complicated grant program that they've ever had. But what we're finding now is we're finding that more and more venue really want to go through that particular process, or thought that there were better alternatives, are now starting to access that with success. California Relief Grant is back in the news, and we'll jump into that. And you could be receiving an email from Lindustry in the next 4 or 5 weeks if you are waitlisted. So keep an eye in your email for something from Lindustry, and if you get it, go in and fill out that particular process. But there's more monies that apparently are going to become available. We'll share the exact details with you. One of our favorite local economists, and we have several through the CSUB Department of Economics, Richard Gerhardt, is here to talk about recovery COVID, and knowing Richard, likely more. So we'll have him on in a little while, talk about more relief programs, your questions, and we just had the poll. So if you have questions today, please hit the Q&A box. We will be monitoring the Q&A box afterwards. Also, if you have anything or any comments or anything, go to chat box. Our producer, Maureen Busher-Dang, is there actively going to be putting in items into the chat for you. So let's continue to roll. So when I started getting ready for today, I wanted to, I couldn't find any resources on the SBA's new forgiveness portal, or I couldn't find the score, the reduction score tool. So what I did was I did take screenshots of the presentation that I was on with lenders last week that I probably mentioned last week. I took screenshots and maneuvered those in here, and here's one of those fine examples. And after spending that time of doing that and popping in about 12 of these kind of, difficult to read, tough slides, I found the presentation, and we'll be going there in just a second. But again, just kind of the key things here. Again, it's 150,000 or less for the PPP for second law. And again, that represents about 93% of the total outstanding loan amount for PPP loans. We still have about 6.5 million borrowers nationwide that need to be forgiven. This is kind of why they came out with this. Is really a gift, really kind of a gift to smaller community banks and credit unions, and those that really were wondering how they were going to get through this forgiveness process. So by having this portal where they can actually opt into, and more banks are opting into locally. I didn't see a ton of banks that had opted in, the community banks and credit unions here in Kern County. However, I still think more of them will jump in. I think we're getting closer to about 900 of the 5,500 lenders that did PPP loans are jumping in. So we do have that, and we're going to go through some of that processes today in something that looks a little bit more appealing to your eye rather than my screenshots. So the other, besides forgiveness, the other tool that SBA has developed is the COVID revenue reduction score, also just called the score. And it is based on a few different factors, and basically your geographic location, the size of your business, and the industry that you're in. And there's an algorithm that an SBA contractor has put together. And if you fall in there that likely, yes, you were 25% or more, then you do not have to provide that information to your lender or through the SBA portal. So there's the direct forgiveness option that we're going to talk about, and we're going to go through that. And there is the actual COVID revenue reduction score that all lenders can go through, regardless if you are dealing directly with your lender through for the forgiveness process or through the SBA portal. It was devised using current economic data. I think SBA knows that there's going to be some that slip through the cracks, some that maybe didn't have that 25%. But I think they feel comfortable enough with the large amount of people that would be able to actually go through this process and not have to provide that information, and give businesses the chance to move on to find customers and to do more marketing and do other things to get back and get recovering their small businesses. So there's a little bit of that. And so let's kind of do a little swap of the share of the screen here. Let me jump into kind of what we're doing here of the direct fits portal. So thank you, SBA, for providing this. I wished I would have found it before I pulled up those nasty looking screenshots, but here is kind of what the portal is going to look like. It's great that you as a small business have your PPP loan and you have access to this information, and you can get in here and get your, if your bank opts in. I don't have that. I don't have that luxury. So I depend on things like this and from you in order to kind of help that. So first of all, you do need to register for the particular portal. Here's the web address for that, and for going in, it's the Direct Forgiveness Portal. SBA operates several portals now online. They had the Restaurant Revitalization. They still have the Shuttered Venue portal open. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan portal is open. And this is the Direct Forgiveness Portal, not to be confused with the others. So this again, those that are 150,000 and less, they strongly recommend using the Google Chrome browser or the Microsoft Edge for the best experience. And a new registration will be required in order to utilize the portal. So here's the process of going through registration. We won't spend much time on that. You'll be able to find that online and through a variety of different sources. And so you will go through and you will verify your email and you'll confirm that particular address. And you'll get a greetings. Isn't that nice? Greetings from the SBA PPP Forgiveness Fund. And then you continue to move on. The one thing that's really important here is once you provide and verify your email address, it cannot be changed. So really, you really need to look and see what was on your PPP actual loan application and make sure you're using the consistent same information. And that's true with all this information. The fastest way to get into kind of a issue with any of these processes is when your information changes. A lot of these are fraud protection. A lot of them are other areas that are moving on. So, but do that. And then it's just a simple process of signing in through the portal. You do have the two-factor authentication. Ooh, that must mean I need a drink. So you do have to go through the two-factor login process before you actually do that. You'll get a text message. So again, it's vital that all of your information is current. So then you get into the direct forgiveness portal. And here it's going to be, you know, basically a home page. What's really about this we go here, and you can actually take even a guided tour if you'd like. And there's a lot of help in FAQs. I think it's similar to those of you that went through the Restaurant Revitalization Fund portal process, where it was a really nice experience because it was most people spent 10 to 20 minutes in the portal. Not everybody, some individuals experienced a little bit of a problem, but for most, the experience was pretty easy to get in and get out. And SBA will also populate a lot of stuff once they realize who you are, such as a lot of your contact information. So you're going to need to enter your employee identification number, your social security number, or your ITIN number. You're also going to need to enter your SBA loan information, and then you will find your loan once it pops up. So as you see, they've mentioned right here that there are measures in place that'll prevent duplicate applications from going through. So the direct portal, the direct forgiveness portal that opened will also provide some of the loan details. And this is really nice because once it identifies, as I mentioned, who you are, a lot of this stuff is going to pop up. So, you know, the one thing you really want to check is that when the information pops up, that it's consistent with information that you have. If it's not consistent, you're going to want to contact your borrower. If anything that you see in there does not seem right to you, you're going to want to contact your borrowers. Okay. So in here, what you're going to do is the first thing you're going to do is actually enter gross receipts for 2019 and 2020. So you'll jump in with your annual information there. And then as you move down through the direct forgiveness portal, you'll put the number of employees at the time of your application and at forgiveness. Now, that doesn't affect the amount of your forgiveness. It is statistical purposes only. 150,000 and less get automatic forgiveness no matter what the employees are. If you spent the money properly on payroll, which is going to be 60%, and then 40% on other areas that were allocated for non-payroll expenses that were allowable forgiveness expenses. So I know I'm going through this quickly, but a lot of other stuff to go through. So here is just kind of like moving through the direct portal process. Some of you might not have to provide supporting documentation. After you go through the score process, they might say, we don't need your supporting documentation. Remember, loans of of less than 150 are only the ones that can participate in this. And so some of the documentation that you are going to need and be required, and let's kind of blow this screen up, maybe not that much, but a little bit more or less. I forget how sensitive this is. So there, your documentation is going to be, if you need to put in the documentation, then you come through the direct forgiveness portal, you complete, have a summary right there, the summary of your request. It'll tell you the amount, it'll give you the forgiveness amount right then. And then you must sign and attest that all the information that you are providing is correct. Again, the keys there are actually managing the PPP loan, spending the money. So 60% is for direct, 60% or more is for direct payroll expenses and allowable expenses in that area. So moving along, there's a little area for missing items, and there's a summary if something is missing. And then the application needs to be signed, of course, and it is even through a DocuSign process, but it is very, very important that you realize that any documents you signed electronically are legally binding documents. You have to select that you're going to use the electronic process and signature and then continue. So most of you are probably by now a little bit familiar with the docu-signing process. So there's a little bit there. They'll highlight the areas to what needs to be signed, and you've pretty much gone through this process. Again, if there's anything that you have a problem with, one thing that's really good is there's a lot of FAQs. There's a lot of help out there. Some of our consultants are working on this as we go. The important thing is that if you have a problem with any of the information in there, do not complete the process to contact your lender. If any of the numbers seem to be off from what you have, if you run into unique situations to where you have sold your business, or if something else has changed during the process from the time you took out your original PPP first loan or the second draw, if anything has changed and you think that you don't feel comfortable with the information that is being presented, then please contact your lender directly. There's a process for declined signature. We won't get into that too much. And then the submitted application that actually continues to roll through this particular portal, and it is submitted. A little thing for questions. And there we go, direct forgiveness, the SBA decision. And really, it's up to your lender, goes in and looks at it, and then because your lender makes an approval or not to approve recommendation. So generally, I would think if they were going to make a non-recommendation that they would contact a borrower. But there are 5,500 lenders here, so a lot of different things can happen. There is some wonderful contact information that's on this screen right here. I suggest if you're going to be going through the direct forgiveness process, that you get their 800 number or their 877-552-2692 number. And where frequently asked questions could be found through this particular process. Okay, there we go. There's that process, direct forgiveness. Now, along with direct forgiveness, there is that particular 25% reduction tool, and we will have more on that later because I'm running out of time. And there's some information on the PPP, but let me move along and get back to the PowerPoint part of this. Do a new share here and move on. Okay, so just some quick things on EIDL. Next week, I will give you a little heads up. Our scheduled guest speaker next week is going to be from the Fresno district of the U.S. Small Business Administration, Andy Cito. So if you have SBA questions, which we all do, bring them next week. Next week's a good time for that. There's a lot going on with EIDL, and hopefully, we shared last week that SBA hopes to be caught up with a lot of the EIDL backlog by the middle part of August. We'll be closer to the middle part of August. So hopefully if you out there have had considerations going on, or if you've been hung up for other things, it starts getting cleared up. And like I say, we have heard from many of you this week, and thank you for doing that and finding out that it sounds good. Well, the news of the day is just going to have to wait till next week because I am running out of time. And, we'll do more on EIDL next week. We did talk about, and just want to keep this on the front burner because potentially there's going to be a EIDL increase to $2 million for those larger small businesses that can really, number one, qualify for a $2 million loan, but also really can demonstrate a need for a $2 million EIDL loan. And before this current disaster and any of the disasters that happened with earthquakes and tornadoes and hurricanes and freezes and floods, the EIDL maximum was $2 million, but by the size and scope of this one, it was done. This is not a done deal. It is still officially under review. It is still under review. So more to that to come. Again, if you have a need to request an increase in your EIDL from the current limit of maximum of $150 to up to $500,000, again, that is the COVID EIDL increase request with an S at sba.gov. And then there's other processes that you can take from there. Again, your timeline on forgiveness, that for many of you first draw loans, they are coming due. Again, those, if they come due, there is not a time where forgiveness runs on you, which means that SBA will start asking you for payments. I don't know if you'll get those payments back if you have full forgiveness. That is not something that they're talking about. We talked about the California Relief Grant a little bit, and the governor has added another $1.5 billion to the program. Round 7, tier number 7, is open as of August the 3rd. So yesterday, and it runs through August the 16th. It is not open for anybody wanting to apply. It is open for waitlisted applicants. So if you're on that infamous Lindustry waitlist and have been for the California Relief Grant from either of the 6 previous rounds, then you are being considered at this time. So be checking your email for something from Lindustry. Go in, and there are steps that you need to take in order to complete the California Relief Grant. A few of the safe harbors are there. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to keep talking about this nano loan program because it's just not loan programs for underserved business owners looking for small amounts of capital, 5 to 20. Contact Access Plus Capital if you would like more information on that. And now that brings us to our special guest speaker, Richard Gearhart, Richard S. Gearhart. I think I need to start throwing my middle initial in there, but Richard is an associate professor of economics at CSUB, and he joined in 2014 as an assistant professor, was promoted to associate professor in 2020, received his doctorate and master's degree from Clemson University, where he is a proud alumni, and taught actually standalone accounting for 3 years. See, what else is Richard? Forget what you're reading. You can read that. Let me tell you, Richard is up for Father of the Year for the fine work that he has done in raising his 2 daughters, while his wife, important their family, continues gainfully employed, saving lives in the healthcare industry. Richard, always great to have you. Thank you for joining us. Take it away.
Thank you for having me, Kelly. And it's a pleasure to see everyone who has joined in for the webinar. I'm glad I got to do this. So, I kind of want to give an overview of kind of what we're seeing in the local economy. More than happy to answer any questions. Overall, kind of top-down view, I'm cautious. Not pessimistic, not optimistic, but cautious. And really, the biggest issue we're going to face in the recovery is COVID. And We've seen the massive surge in COVID cases in a number of southern hotspots. If you've been reading the newspaper, all of a sudden the daily cases jumped from the 80s to the low 100s into the several hundreds. Healthcare workers are being burdened again. So that I think is the biggest reason for any economic caution is COVID. So a couple of things that I'm seeing. If any of you read The Californian a few days ago, John Cox, who's a must read for any of his business articles, talked about a recent report from a place called Smart Asset that ranked metro economic growth from the kind of bottom of the pandemic until April 2021, and Bakersfield ranked around 14th out of 49 metro areas, which looks pretty good. Unfortunately, the reason why Bakersfield is ranked so high is because of our employment growth. And unfortunately, they looked between January 2020 and April 2021, and the biggest change is seasonal farming employment. So unfortunately, we're not really getting back to private sector employment levels that we saw in January of 2020, which was right before the pandemic. So, that speaks to the quite considerable labor market shortages that I'm sure a lot of small businesses are facing right now. And that is something that is a little bit worrisome. And it's a little bit worrisome for the main reason that there's no simple cause for labor market shortages. And I think I've come up with about 6 explanations that all have support for the reason why. Hold on, Claire. I'll be right there. Okay, great. Okay, Claire, I'll be there. Sorry, daughter, I'm proud of her bowel movements, potty training. There are largely 6 reasons why we're seeing these labor market shortages. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence about unemployment benefits leading to people wanting to stay at home. That's true. It's not as big as what people are saying, but that's absolutely limiting, especially in the leisure and hospitality and service sectors, a return to work. One of the bigger ones that has been identified in Arizona and Massachusetts is a lack of childcare. And if you look, it's now more traditional for a 2-parent household to have 2 parents working. And we're seeing evidence of that. Unfortunately, a lot of childcare is in-home childcare, not in a facility. So it's private individuals running a daycare out of their own home, and those have largely been shuttered by the pandemic. So one parent is having to stay at home. That's typically the parent who works in the leisure, hospitality, or service sector. There's a feeling of an unpleasantness of service sector jobs, where people either don't want to deal with customers anymore, or it was just a lot of work. For the pay scale, so people are simply not returning to these sectors. There's obviously still a fear of the virus in areas with relatively lower vaccination rates, like we see in Kern County. People are simply not going back out or don't necessarily feel comfortable going back to work. Unfortunately, COVID-19 does have a lot of correlation with comorbidities, and we have a lot of comorbidities, heart disease and lung disease in Kern County, which is unfortunate. But what we're also seeing is an uptick in individuals, especially in these sectors, who are going back to school or exiting the labor force. And that's probably going to be the biggest issue in our return to normalcy, is exiting the labor force. Right now, our labor force in Kern County is way down. Compared to the first quarter of 2020, we've lost 30,000 people in the labor force. That's about 8 to 10%. So about 1 in 10 workers who were working in Kern County before the pandemic have simply stopped. They're not looking for jobs. They're not receiving unemployment because they're not looking for jobs. And they've moved out of the area, or they've retired, or they've simply turned into students, or they've given up. And that's probably going to be the biggest impediment to returning back to normal, is incentivizing people to return to the labor force. And that will take months, if not years. In the smart asset study that is showing on the screen, we've seen no improvements in consumer spending. That's both good and bad. It's good because it kind of hints that Kern County has tended to weather recessions relatively well relative to the national economy. If you look at 2007 to 2009, Kern suffered, but we were nowhere near the bottom of what you saw in a lot of other major metro areas, both in California and around the country. So it's good because it means our consumers are resilient. It means that our consumers are still spending money. It means that our consumers are very aware of the potential detriments of not spending locally and the impacts on small business shutdowns. Unfortunately, we haven't really seen a bump up in consumer spending with quite considerable stimulus money in the area. So what it means is that people have been spending money on debt repayment rather than kind of those stimulative impacts, buying furniture, TVs, new pool, clothes, food, those sorts of things. Paying down debt is important, but that's not the purpose. That's not the goal of a stimulus check. So that's something that we need to keep an eye on. Informal employment in Kern County is on the rise. Informal employment is either under the table payment or temp jobs. Those are on the rise as employers desperately search for employees. So a lot of employees might work part-time jobs at a number of establishments to make ends meet. Unfortunately, we don't want to see a lot of informal employment, in large part because no one's tied down to one particular establishment and they might leave a job at a moment's notice. We've seen a massive increase in the debt load that the average consumer here in Kern County is carrying. That's, again, both a good sign and a bad sign. Consumers increase debt when they feel comfortable about being able to pay down that debt. We've also seen increases in the savings rate in Kern County. So people aren't going more into debt without the ability to pay. People know that they can afford the debt that they're incurring. Unfortunately, again, this is a consequence of two things. It's a consequence of low mortgage rate, where people are purchasing homes, and you've seen the massive increases in the home prices, but it's also low interest rates on credit cards, home equity lines of credit, auto loans, the private loans you can get from Ashley Furniture or a number of establishments. Now, one word of caution on this. I really, really hope that we're not in another housing bubble. I think we are. And we've seen median home prices increase past 300,000, which is something we haven't seen in decades here in Kern County, if ever. And unfortunately, I fear that in the next few years, as tightening standards, as lending standards tighten, as lending standards tighten, and all these other things, I fear that consumers won't be able to afford their homes, might go underwater. The biggest future issues, there are two. COVID variants. We're seeing it with the Delta variant. It's the most infectious disease since smallpox, chickenpox. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't remember how infectious those diseases were because we've done a very good job vaccinating those away, smallpox especially. That's very worrisome, and it's especially worrisome in an area where we have relatively few vaccinated individuals, where we are kind of a breeding ground for variants. But the other biggest future issue is the eviction moratorium that will end eventually. Right now it's September 30th, and that could have a very big impact on consumers' ability to both pay and work. we already have homeless issues here in Kern County that are notable and that are very visible. And so that's something that we need to keep an eye on in September is making sure that these federal and state level programs that have money to help both landlords and renters actually get to the landlords and renters. Unfortunately, we've needlessly complicated the application processes for these so that a bunch of money that's sitting there is being unused, and that's problematic. So again, kind of a very broad overview. I'm cautious about the economic recovery. I agree with you, with those of you who said 2023 is probably back to where we were pre-COVID. If you look at that study 5 weeks ago was before July 4th. July 4th, we were pretty much open. People were celebrating. My family and I walked to our lake around our house and watched the fireworks. And there were plenty of other people. And just think about how much has happened in those intervening 5 weeks. So I'm cautious. I think 2023 is when we start to come back. We just have to get a handle on COVID, and we have to make sure that we don't slide backwards further.
Wow, thank you. You got me with that housing bubble. I think it's something that's out there with everybody is looking at. Nobody wants to talk about it. And I think you're the first that's mentioned it now, but really home prices throughout California are just bizarre. They're equivalent to what we ran into in 2008 and 2007.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the housing bubble touched us in 2007 and 2008. But median home prices were $290,000, $300,000, not $337,000, which in an area with relatively high poverty rates and a relatively affordable cost of living is worrisome.
Yeah, Richard, you did touch on this. You touched on, but when I look at this smart asset, which clever name. Cities with strongest economic recoveries list, and Bakersfield was 14 out of 49 of the ones that they surveyed. I look at that top page and the top 20, and none of them had a negative change in consumer spending except for the Kern County SMA. So could you just once again, you had mentioned it's not maybe that important, but when I see some of the big growth that's even happening in Fresno at 18.2% as a positive number, what does all that mean?
Yeah, so it means that I think we weathered the recession fairly well. Kern County is, one of the benefits of an oil and ag-driven economy is you're relatively nationwide recession-proof. Which is kind of what you see with those numbers. You didn't see this massive drop. All the positive numbers say that all these cities experienced massive drops in consumer spending from the pandemic, and they've been building back up. Well, if we didn't see a massive drop in consumer spending because consumers still went out, still ate at the restaurants, maybe did takeout, maybe built pools, enjoyed their backyards more, I think that suggests that we weathered the COVID recession decently well. The problem is that we got a lot of stimulus money, a tremendous amount of stimulus money from the 3 rounds of stimulus payments. And so we were hoping to see consumers using that stimulus money to stimulate the economy, buying consumer goods. It's extra money. You should spend it frivolously. Unfortunately, people paid down debt with it, which is still important. It makes households feel better about their financial position, but it doesn't help the economy. So that's what I think that number represents, is that we're using stimulus money to pay down existing credit card debt, mortgage debt, auto loan debt, rather than buying new stuff.
Fascinating. Fascinating stuff. So where would business to consumer, or excuse me, business to business spending how would that, I don't see it listed. I see consumer spending, but I don't see business spending. How would that fit into this overall equation?
So business to bit, that's hard to measure. And a lot of surveys don't include it. So I think they probably ignored it. I haven't seen much data on business spending during the pandemic. But I would imagine that if you look, the third and the fourth column are the closings of small businesses. We had a lot of small businesses close here in Kern County relative to other areas. And I think in part that's a lot of the small mom and pop cleaning, landscaping, gardening services going out of business, because those were some of the hardest hit during this pandemic. But it also, I think, highlights the continued struggle that we face for small businesses where, the original PPP loans were hard to acquire. Outside of webinars like this, information wasn't widely available. You had to have a pre-existing relationship with banks, those sorts of things. So I think we're kind of seeing the downsides of federal policies that weren't very effective, weren't good.
I will agree with you that I think that there's a lot of unevenness in this. There's a lot of, and I think we did see at least a little of that change in March of this year when we saw the PPP that was actually, which I thought was really beneficial for very small and neediest businesses, where they were able to access $20,000 just based on having $100,000 in revenue in their business. So it didn't drive to the profit and loss. And I think that changed, but I think it might have been a little late in the game for a lot of small businesses since we quit taking PPP in May. I don't have a question. I just wanted you to know, what I've seen is a lot of unevenness also where, some did well and were informed. And I think a lot of the people here, but some that didn't know about the resources were unavailable to get that. And they're the ones that I think are reflecting in those bigger numbers. So again, no question there, sorry. I'm trying to play stump the economist and I'm not doing a very good job of it. Okay, looks like we're pushing up on time. If there's any questions that you have for Dr. Richard S. Gearhart, please go to the Q&A box. We do have a couple questions there. I'm gonna stop the share and jump in there real quick. First question in the box is to provide the email address for EIDL amount increases. And I covered that rather quickly. I don't know if Maureen has been able to put that into the chat. Also, the next question is there going to be a shutdown in California or nationwide? Richard, I'm going to give you that question.
I don't believe, I don't believe that there's any political appetite for a shutdown. I can almost guarantee that in California, with the recall election lasting until mid-September, there will be no California-wide shutdown. It's going to be a much tougher election than what was previously hoped. So I think up until at least, the results of that recall election come out, there's going to be no appetite for a California-wide shutdown. I think it'll be local. Nationwide, President Biden, he's kind of landed on the side of states and localities doing more of those sorts of things. I think what you might see is a lot more employers mandating vaccines or wearing masks for both consumers and employees.
Okay, one more question. Related to the housing bubble. And you might have answered this slowly, but let's go through this. The housing bubble in 2008 seems to be related to buyers lacking financial means to truly acquire the home. And there was probably some fraud involved there and some over-aggressive mortgage originators. Are you seeing something similar today, or are the banks retaining higher credit standards? Doctor?
So we're seeing about the same lending standards. They've loosened a little bit, but not appreciably so. There's none of those ninja, no income, no job loans that were really prevalent 2007 to 2008. So I'd say lending standards are about the same. But what you're seeing is pretty sizable infusions of money into people's pockets with the stimulus payments that are used for down payments. And those are kind of creating these bidding wars for properties to now where you have people bidding over the asking price or even saying that they're not going to do any inspection of the property. So I think people can afford it, but they have to be very careful. I have a feeling a lot of people are using the variable rate mortgage loans, those ARM loans again. And the Fed cannot and will not maintain low interest rates for the foreseeable future. There's already considerable pressure to raise those to limit inflation.
Can a business that just started at the beginning of the pandemic get a PPP loan? Probably the answer to that is no. You needed to be in business pre-pandemic. So that's going back. Most of those dates were in February 15th, 2020. It seems to be the most common date used. And also the PPP, unfortunately, program ended toward the end of May 2021.
Yeah, I see there's one more question that I just kind of want to touch on. So basically refinancing, you have to consider two things. My rule of thumb is if you can save about a percentage point on the interest rate, it's probably worth it. But a lot of people forget that there are expenses that are incurred from refinancing your mortgage. That can be anywhere from like $2,000 to $7,000. You can roll that into your mortgage, but I'd be careful. If people have extra cash, what I always recommend is, going for longer loans, going for the 30-year loans. And if you have the ability to pay more during that 30 years, then do it.
Great. And that was a question on, with mortgage rates being so low and good credit, is it worth doing so at 1 or 2% interest? And probably the amount of time you plan on staying in the home is going to matter as well.
Yeah. It's, you want to make sure that you're living in the home for about 7 years to refinance. If you're just, looking to to move in the near future, then it's probably not a good idea. But those are, I would go to a mortgage broker. They're much more in tune with those sorts of questions than I am.
Well, time's up. Well, thank you, Doctor. It's always a pleasure having you on Webinar Wednesday. And I still am going to nominate you for Father of the Year, Well,
if I can't tie this balloon, I may be out of the running.
Well, that goes without saying, but I'm still going to nominate you, I believe. So maybe a better man than me. I don't know about a better father, though. So. Okay, so next week we have Mr. Andy Cito from the SBA District Office in Fresno. Going to be a great webinar again, number 74, webinar number 74 in the series. We'll be back next Wednesday. Always a pleasure, Doctor. Thank you so much. For Richard Gearhart, I'm Kelly Bearden. We'll see you next week. Everybody have a great week. Goodbye, everybody.